I'm going to give you another analogy, and one is a bike lock. You know, when I was in college, you had a chain, had a little padlock, right? And that was enough of a deterrent. And then pretty soon people came with wire cutters, and you know, now we have titanium locks, and people are taking their bike seat off. And the bottom line is, it's always going to change. And if we don't have a system that's adaptable, if we don't have communication and adaptability, then all of this means nothing. I mean, because there's a backdoor somewhere. And so the innovation that Steve talked so eloquently about is absolutely critical, staying ahead of where the threat is and being nimble and being diverse. And that's the challenge that I see, which is one size fits all may be the most dangerous thing we can do, is applying, you know, one system to all of this, because number one, it'll tap down innovation, but it also will create greater vulnerabilities if we're only doing the same thing over and over again. And so this is an area that I think there is incredible bipartisan concern, but also a willingness to look at that, and we can all say, that's not where we want to be. That is not where we want to be. And as a former state official, I can only say, I feel your pain. You know, back in the day before we had all of this technology, I was the tax commissioner, and you know, yeah, he nods, and he knows what those IRS audits are, and rightfully so. They want to protect their information. There's a lot of great information sharing. We couldn't do what we do in terms of enforcement without a relationship with the IRS. But a lot of that is box checking. It's not real. It's not real security. It's, you got the checklist, you go out there, you ding someone because, you know, there's the wrong kind of door, as opposed to, you know, what's the actual breach. And so I want to go to what you're seeing in state government, because state government isn't as complicated as this, but it definitely is a laboratory for innovation and a laboratory for coordination. And I want to give you a chance, Mr. Reese, to tell us what you've learned in your role, not just in Oklahoma, but your role as heading up the Chief Information Officers organization, and give us the 5 things you want us to do.
Fantastic. So
you need to press your red light, because I want to hear it.
So what a great opportunity, right? Because being a part of NASIO, we work with all 50 states and 2 territories. And I assure you, what we hear across every state is the same story over and over again. There's overregulation, there's duplicity, there's inefficiency. You know, we can give multiple examples where we are making check-the-box decisions instead of being allowed to work with our federal partners and make good business decisions. Things like cybersecurity and dealing with these audits is not just a simple check-the-box type of technology. You've got to look at the opportunities. I've had scenarios where in Oklahoma, because for the last 5 years we've been in a state of flux. We've been going through this consolidation of all of our IT within the executive branch, and have made tremendous strides and have found tremendous savings and efficiencies. However, we still run up against a lot of hurdles, because it becomes very troublesome trying to align with our federal partners, who still treat us as if we're siloed. Here I'm working and incentivized by our federal partners to consolidate, but when I go engage with my federal partners, they are not consolidated, and they still treat me as if I'm siloed, and therefore I end up losing all of my efficiencies, because I have to do these repetitive processes. I also make these decisions where, if I know I'm working with an agency, and I've got great examples of some aging hardware at an agency, right, that I was reaching end of life. And I knew I had a plan during the consolidation that I was going to be moving all of that network infrastructure over onto our on-prem shared solution, and therefore would be on a newer solution. But when the auditors came in and identified that hardware was not on their list of approved versions of hardware, they said, no, we have to replace that. We said, wait a minute, we're going to replace it. We've purchased extended maintenance on it, so we've mitigated the risk, and we would like to take those dollars and go apply them somewhere else, say on an application layer security, because we know then we're also going to be absorbing it later. Did not matter. We had to check the box. we were forced with making a decision of spending the money to go ahead and replace a piece of hardware before we were prepared, before it was even an appropriate return on investment. And we ended up making that check the box decision instead of getting to make a good business decision, which is what I was charged to do in this role, was to go make good business decisions with our agencies. Those type of scenarios come up over and over and over again.
So if we gave you a place that was responsive to this, that was an override, that was looking at a broader kind of spectrum of concerns. So let's say in that case, they say, go buy this equipment, you go, I'm going to take this to the council of, you're crazy, and I'm going to plead my case that that's not reasonable. I think one of these things that you get is that when things are siloed here, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. They aren't familiar. They're just like, don't confuse me with the facts and your problems. This is my problem, and I've got to make sure that you have this. So if there were a place, and maybe thinking about this, if there were a place where you could go or industry could go to say, no, I'm not going to do that, and I don't want to be dinged for it. I've got a logical reason. I'm going to appeal your decision someplace so that you have to be accountable for the disruption that you're creating. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because states are very similar in this role to industry. They're the users, they're the regulated in this case. And so it seems to me that if we had some place where you could go to say, this isn't smart in terms of overall security, and you didn't get forced into this by the time crunch of an audit or dinged on an audit, that might be helpful.
Absolutely. Timing is such a challenge. The Oklahoma Tax Commission is a fantastic partner to me and my organization. They have been great at working with us to find efficiencies in what we can do together, and we've been able to achieve some really good things with those folks. But yet, it comes down to some things that you think would be simple, but because the technology is ahead of the regulations, we find ourselves struggling for guidance. The Oklahoma Tax Commission recently worked with us on moving to a hosted voice solution. And in trying to determine how we deploy and meet all the federal requirements for the IRS and others for this solution, we found ourselves struggling with trying to determine what set of standards do we use. Is it the voice regulations, or is it cloud-based or hosted solution type regulations? They don't match. And so we end up seeking guidance. And it takes months.
I think Mr. Garfield wants to add to this.
If I could just add that what Mr. Reese is saying is so real, and we hear it so often at the state level, but we also experience it and see it at the federal level as well. And so this is a broad-based problem that requires a solution.
I just want to make one final point, and that's about risk-taking. Everybody has a checklist, and they want to meet that checklist because if something happens, they want to say, I did my job, as opposed to I'm part of an evolving, necessary, very dynamic industry that needs to be mobile and agile, and we need to tolerate to some degree, and I'm not saying that but we need to tolerate that this will not be perfect, and we're going to learn as time goes on. And so we need to tell people, don't do things that don't make sense, and if it didn't make sense, we aren't going to ding you if something happens. And so that's part of the problem here, is that when you have enforcement actions, the dinging or the risk-taking doesn't happen because people are so afraid that they'll be held accountable.
Can I add one more thing? Because I think in industry, we have tried to innovate, and I think this has been the I think some of the concern that we've had is we've looked at things for years from risk. We transitioned from compliance-based to risk-based. We have worked with cyber insurance actually to be able to understand how risk scores actually work and how we can develop better frameworks to do this. But we're driven by a compliance and a regulatory environment that says, just as you said, here's the box. But I would certainly look at what industries are doing, because there is a lot of work already in place in industries. We've been doing it for 10 years. We have thousands upon thousands of organizations, tens of thousands, that get assessed against this every year. But it does meet the requirement of HIPAA, but again, the requirement here is to manage risk, not to check the box.
And we need to be sending the message to the people who are reviewing it because they're box checkers and they need to be in the risk assessment business. I totally agree.